Good morning once again. My name is Rastio Wrobenski. I'm Deputy Regional Director of UNDP for Europe and CIS. I hope you enjoyed very substantive opening speeches. So we can move to first plenary session, which is focusing on people, planet and progress in the SDG era. Actually, opening speakers made my role easier. They have outlined the complexity of SDG agenda very, very well. But let me just remind you of a couple of points. Clearly, adoption of Sustainable Development Goals in 2015 in Agenda 2030 created new reality for development and international development work. Clearly, SDG targets are much more complex and interrelated in nature than the targets in MDGs. When we look at just sheer numbers, you may recall that in Millennium Development Goals agenda, we had 8 goals, 21 targets, and 60 indicators. Under Sustainable Development Goals, we have 17 goals, so we have as many goals as we used to have targets under Millennium Development Goals. We have 169 targets, and we have 244 indicators, and member states are up to now even not able to agree on all the indicators. So there are still some indicators which are not methodologically agreed, or they are data missing. And of course, this level of complexity will require very important role to be played by evaluations. It's clear that statistical data and survey can only give part of the picture, and more in-depth and qualitative review will be required in order to see and interpret those interrelations and impacts within the countries and across the countries. And of course, there is very important learning and accountability role of evaluations. It will help to understand what works and what doesn't and why, and it will also help us to improve the ways we work towards achieving SDGs. So it's really defining moment also for evaluation community and evaluation practice. Also, it is a defining moment in terms of redefining what national evaluation capacity is required in the process of achieving SDGs. So we have, in the first panel, we have 2 very distinguished speakers, also representing 2 key institutions behind this conference. UNDP Independent Evaluation Office and European Evaluation Society. So let me start by introducing very briefly Indran Naidoo, Director of Independent Evaluation Office of UNDP. Indran is currently the director and has overseen a significant reform in evaluation function of UNDP, really making it fully independent with enhanced credibility and with massive expansion in terms of scope and coverage. He has introduced a number of innovations in our evaluation policy, whether it's establishment of audit and evaluation advisory committee or evaluation advisory panel. Indran has a distinguished career in South Africa civil service. He has been at the end of his career there Deputy Director General for Monitoring and Evaluation in South Africa Public Service Commission. He is also co-chair of the 3rd Africa Evaluation Association and its vice chair of United Nations Evaluations Group. So you will agree, one of those who can really extremely competently speak on the issues I have outlined. The second speaker we are going to have is Riitta Oksanen. Riitta is Deputy Director General in the Department of Development Policy of Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and is also President of European Evaluation Society. Riitta is a Senior Advisor on Development Evaluation in the Ministry, but she has been also in the past chairing for 2 years OECD DAC Evaluation Network Task Team for Focus, which was focusing on evaluation capacity development. And you know that OECD DAC is leading on development policy, so that's the place where cutting-edge trends on evaluation in development are being discussed. She has been also Director for Development Policy and advisor on management and effectiveness of development cooperation in the ministry. And let me also mention that when Finland was chairing European Council, she was leading the working group on development cooperation. So again, Riitta, extremely well placed to speak on the issues I have mentioned. So the way how we are going to work, it's actually very simple. I would like Indran and Riitta in their opening remarks try to elaborate how they see the role of evaluation in achieving SDGs, and also say a few words how are we going to address challenges of strengthening national evaluation systems, and whether there are some lessons there and best practices already now. Then we will open a floor for discussion, questions, and comments. I will take them in batches, and then we will go back to the panel. We have plenty of time to get into detail and nitty-gritty, so please do not limit yourself and take your time in your opening remarks. So we will start with Indran, and then we will continue with Riitta. Floor is yours.
It's an honor to share with you some thoughts that I hope would help to frame the Istanbul conference. And I've drawn from various strands. A lot of it's been the experience of evaluation in the UN system, the UNDP and its REO, but also international practice when it pertains to the topic on hand. I'll go through a series of slides which would provide some points of entry for further discussion, which hopefully will address both areas, the evaluation dimension and the development dimension. Starting off with the national evaluation capacity issues, what are the implications in terms of the SDGs? Your role, your participation and role in the SDG future, as we call it, and evaluation and development considerations, because ultimately evaluation is done to a purpose, and the purpose is to improve the lives of citizens. And the various keynote addresses this morning were important, but in particular Michelle's address, which integrated the various strands of UN reform, the improvement in terms of a more agile, development-focused UN, is fed by a very strong and robust evaluation function. So we need to look at what I'm saying in context of the earlier directions and messages. In terms of the national evaluation capacity, I'm talking about 7 contours of the NEC journey, and I've been involved in 4 of the 5 big events in the first series that has moved globally. And within that, I argue that the NEC, the national evaluation capacity, is linked to development and its governance. Secondly, the signature regional events have helped to sustain the momentum. NEC for SDGs, I talk about the Bangkok Declaration, and many of you were there 2 years ago, and happy to meet you again. UN's affirmation in terms of what the Secretary General has mentioned about transparency and accountability. Evaluation, I argue, is normative because it takes us to a point where we want a better world. And evaluation policy is there for accountable institutions. And finally, the professionalization of evaluation. And all these elements obviously work with each other. Firstly, if we were to look at the point that the NEC is linked to development and its governance, we recognize the topic of national evaluation capacity is 2 to 3 decades old. It's an old topic, but it's really directed to advancing development. And there's been many interpretations of what capacity means. And there isn't consensus on what capacity means. Hence, it reflects in the diversity of approaches across the globe. And that is a debate that is continuing. However, the approach that the UNDP and the IEO through the series has taken is that drawing on the diversity of the country presence, the 170 countries, drawing on the diversity of the UN agencies, one is able to have a much richer discussion that brings about a iterative, sustained development of capacity, both at the individual and at the institutional level. And this really should show, and I've played with the words around, it should show progress in people, planet, and all goals of the post-2015 agenda. So hence, when we couch the event, we talk about people, planet, and progress, but capacity in itself is the element that would help in the progress to bring about the better change in the people and the planet. The second contour is the approach that UNDP has taken has been to thematicize an event every 2 years, starting right from Morocco, in regional event which helped to sustain NEC momentum through new conversations with new partners, and each had a partner. So just if I were to pause for a moment and ask, which of you have been at the Morocco conference in 2009? And we do. So these are our legacy NEC participants. In Brazil, 2013. So we have colleagues in Brazil. South Africa, 2011. Yes. Thailand, 2015. And of course, the rest of you here. So just on the basis of looking at it, that also reflects the numbers. And Morocco was the first event. I think it was about 30 participants. And I've spoken to some of the colleagues here. It was an early conversation with a methodology that was just government talking to government largely. It didn't have pre-conference training, workshops, etc. But it was a conversation that began. In South Africa, the theme was the use of evaluation in decision-making for public policies and programs. In Brazil, we went to the core evaluation issue of independence, credibility, and utility, and the use of evaluation, and emerged with 18 commitments. In Thailand, we looked at blending evaluation principles with development practice to change people's lives, and we had the Bangkok Declaration. That was also done in partnership with IDEAS, and very happy to see many of the IDEAS colleagues here. And this time, of course, it's People, Planet, and Progress in the SDG era. We do it in partnership with EES. So this journey that has gone on for now 10 years is very deliberative to look at the different dimensions of evaluation and that progress. The NEC for SDGs, the Bangkok Declaration, we argue quite strongly there that government's critical responsibility for SDG, it's dependent upon its capacity to review its performance, which has integrity if it meets principles as enshrined in what we called the Bangkok Declaration. And that was the year of the torch, which we had moved around the world in the event. But critical is the UN's affirmation when the Secretary General, we need a culture of evaluation that's independent, real-time evaluation with full transparency and is robust. And that's been one of the strongest statements about the need for the UN as an accountable organization to ensure that it does it, taking into account and recognizing the principles of independence in particular, which tends to be contested just about always, because evaluation, independent evaluation, profits judgment, and judgment does tend to create tensions. But evaluation is also normative, and last year we were fortunate to have revised the UNEG norms and standards, which entrenched evaluation principles and produced the norms and standards which had clear directions in terms of how to conduct it, etc. We did in English, Spanish, French, Chinese, Russian, and Arabic. And that has been quite a significant contribution to the evaluation community in a very, very practical way. We also argue that policy for accountable institutions, and this remains a critical issue. It's not just the evaluation policy for government, it's evaluation policy for all institutions. And what does this mean? So on my right was the Morocco event, and then it was the South Africa and the Brazil, and then moving over to Bangkok. But a permeating thread through all of this is the necessity for a clear political commitment, understanding, policy, mechanism to take evaluation through so that it makes a difference. And finally, the question of professionalization is really critical because it will provide a more coherent approach to address SDG challenges. And that's the debate that's been going on. Our modest contribution to professionalization is what we did on Monday and Tuesday here. We had close on 300 and somewhat participants engaging in 13 workshops, enhancing their skill and capacity, both the UNDP, the UN, and to skill in a very quick way so people have a better understanding when you move out on that. And that, in a way, is an element of capacity on a more formal basis. This conversation, and for the rest of the week, is also a development of capacity because we build up in that level. So those are the contours of the NEC journey, which I've been involved in 4 out of 5. And it's gone a long way, and it's advanced because of your own contribution. But of course, the effort since the 2015 conference, when SDG was on the agenda, There were the high-level political forum side events to advocate the use of evaluation in the voluntary national reviews. The Deputy Minister spoke about it this morning. There were 40 this year, there were 20 earlier. And in the session in this week, we will be reflecting on what have been these voluntary reviews and what does it say. As evaluators, we made our own assessment and we find there's high variation in how reporting takes place. However, it's a start because we're talking about representation of performance on both a qualitative and quantitative basis, and there's great amount of variation, and that's been a very UN presence. There was an event, the links are here. There's also the United Nations Evaluation Group representing the 46 agencies. We came up with what we call the Sustainable Development Goals Roadmap. And the reason we did that is we said for each of the offices that are involved in it, let's couch and craft a program moving ahead so that we can support, from an evaluative perspective, the respective UN agencies and the governments to build up the evaluative capacity and readiness, both the monitoring and evaluation, because the obligation of the SDGs is to report. You cannot report if you do not have the data and you do not have the mechanisms and systems to do so. And that's been progressing quite well. The UNDP, we've come up with a diagnostic tool. We've come up with guidance notes, online assessments for national evaluation diagnostics. We want to provide countries with tools and reference materials so they know what they can do. So whilst there's been a great growth in the evaluation terminology, the capacity remains uneven. And we come in here, not imposing, but we come in here to support through the various governance programs of the various UN agencies on that. And that will be a topic later in the week. Now, the implications of the SDGs. If we move from MDGs to SDG that Michelle has mentioned, it's much more complex. But it builds on a decade of meeting MDGs, and there's no clear transition, as some of the challenges in meeting the MDGs remain. When we evaluated the MDGs, the same problems are likely to be amplified in the SDGs. But it also becomes more complex because we're engaging a much more diverse set of stakeholders at the global, regional, and national level. It's no longer just one part of the world, it's complete. And it also needs to address challenges in monitoring progress and outcomes, and definitional issues still remain. As we move across and we work with governments, the biggest grapple is how do you define the indicators? Now that you have the indicators and the euphoria of the indicators is over, the reality of practice is coming in, and it's becoming very challenging at the multiple levels. Key issues for evaluators. You need to measure the big picture and development, but it's not easy because development is not a linear process. It's circuitous, it's complex, it's dynamic. And just as you had a complexity of the MDGs, you're going to have an amplified complexity with the SDGs. There's the issue of scale. When aggregating data, higher level results may mask important inter- and inter-regional inequalities and disparities and convey the wrong picture of progress. There is an inherent bias to report positively. But often, the positive aggregated report does not reflect the true inequality, often getting larger at various levels and disparities within and between countries. And that's an important conversation. It's a political conversation, but it's a part where the contestation is going to come about on what constitutes success towards the SDGs and what constitutes credible data, and to what extent genuinely are civil society and other more critical actors brought in this conversation. It's challenging to assess causality between the SDGs and policy, and overall the measurement tools need to address context and go beyond the numbers. The quantitative bias is important, but we all know statistics has great limitations. So we talk about, let's pause and be critical at all dimensions. But opportunities do exist. The SDGs can act as norms that provide a call for ordinary citizens, advocates, and civil society to join forces with government to promote and achieve sustainable development. This is not the project of government alone, it's a project of all in the country. It's an advocacy project, if it really needs to happen. And that needs to take into account broader issues of the extent to which critical reflection is encouraged in countries, the extent to which you have the free press, the media, that allows for these conversations to take place. Now, towards the SDGs, the vision beyond it, your participation and role, we invite you to seek comprehensiveness. All evaluation voices are important. And it's capitalized on synergies of working with UNDP and government counterparts. We see that in terms of how it works. The M&E offices and results-based management workshop that we had in the last 2 days was illustrative and provided some insights. The European Evaluation Society and training workshops, the topics were current and forward-looking. So it was a completely new offering, and the project's not over, because training is not just about a workshop, it's about going back and implementing it. We also say there's great strength in geographic coverage. 526 participants yesterday, 113 countries, 130 nationalities. But what does this mean? All development challenges and issues are represented to be addressed within the framing rubric of the SDGs. So the more you bring in the rest of the world, your project gets more complex. But this links to a broader issue of globalization and the interconnection between the various elements. You cannot look at development as just being the nation state. All countries, they interact. And that means through the interaction, it's going to be an issue. There's very few countries that are not here in this conference, as you would see. And that list is going on. But each one has a complexity of its own. Each one is dealing with the issue of scale and different development priorities. And you are represented. But the strength in institutional diversity, we also paid great attention to bringing in the international organizations. There's something like 140 of you here. Governments, 146, evaluators, UN agencies. Because development today is multi-sectoral. It's also blurred the boundaries of the nation state. Be it migration, climate, security, it affects us all. And this conversation is best had recognizing that the isolated mentality to development does not work for development, peace, and security. And we need to have this paradigm shift also in what do we mean by development evaluation, or the evaluation of developments. And the development issues, new directions for evaluation and national evaluation systems, partnerships, partnerships, partnerships. They're fundamental to addressing the complex promises. The SDG complexity requires a reflection on both the advancement and quality of partnerships. Sometimes there's a belief that the more people you have in a room, the better it's going to be. But that can also get everyone twisted. And we need are these partners adding value, or are they just for symbolic reasons, or are they to validate something? And as evaluators, we ask the question. It's vital in advancing national evaluation capacity development across the globe. Big data this morning and innovations. No shortage of data. What does it mean? How do we drill it? How do we slice it? And there are implications in that, because it's not just about the data, it's the credibility of the data. And in the course of this week, we have the UN statistical people in various sessions grappling with the issue of aggregation, scale, and data. And at this point, I'd stop, not for questions, because my colleague Riitta is going to echo me, and then we'll take it again. Thank you for your attention.
What a huge pleasure it is for me to be standing here today, sharing ideas and views on the challenges and opportunities ahead of us for SDG evaluation. I come from Finland, and actually for me, this is my 4th NEC conference. So I'm not among the elders. There were a few who have participated all 5 NEC conferences, but I've been following this journey for 6 years now. The reason for that is that support to the NEC conferences has been one part of the strategy of my government to support evaluation capacity in our partner countries. We have been working with UNDP on the NEC conferences because the focus here has been to bring together government officials to discuss evaluation issues. But you can see from the journey that we have been little by little moving to what we now call multi-stakeholder platforms and cooperation. Already during the past 2 NEC conferences, there has been a VOPE, a voluntary organization for professional evaluation, working in partnership with UNDP to organize these meetings. This year, it is the European Evaluation Society. I'm the president of that society, and I want to thank both UNDP and the government of Turkey for excellent cooperation in preparing these conferences. I have decided to be brave this morning. My intervention will be based on isolated observations and anecdotal evidence. So it's not a presentation that would be based on robust evaluation evidence. And that's a brave thing to do in an evaluation forum. But I'm doing it because I want to raise opportunities and challenges in Agenda 2030 evaluation, SDG evaluation. And the fact is that we do not yet have comprehensive analysis of the lessons and conclusions, recommendations for the future. This conference will be an important opportunity to come up with those. However, through these isolated observations and anecdotes, there are some elements that, to me, in my mind, are concerns, are challenges. And I'm not sure whether we are taking adequate action on those challenges yet. I would be happy to be proven to be wrong. I would be happy to get evidence through our discussions during these days that come, that things are under control, that we are investing in everything that is necessary for the SDG evaluation to lead to success. I will be covering 3 questions in my presentation, and these are the 3 questions that have shaped the agenda and program of this NEC conference. First of all, what are the changes in national evaluation systems since 2015? And I will dwell a little bit on the operating environment that Agenda 2030 means to us. I will then move on to what all this means for evaluation, what is SDG evaluation, what is new, what is different to traditional evaluation of public policies. And finally, move to what implications for evaluation and national evaluation systems in the future. But actually on the last question, I think that on Friday afternoon when we conclude on this conference, that is when we together have co-created most of these answers. But let me start with the changes in the context, and I will be echoing many things that we have heard in the previous interventions already. I will use my own experience as a European public servant, having looked particularly at the Agenda 2030 process in my own country, Finland, and having shared ideas with colleagues from other European countries through my networks. In Finland, and I will be touching on opportunities and challenges, both of them. In Finland, the parliamentary committee that has the responsibility and lead on Agenda 2030 and SDGs is our parliamentary committee on future. They have been given this responsibility. Recently, that committee made a statement that Agenda 2030 has the potential to be the most significant commitment of our era for the future of humankind. As we have heard, for the first time, we have ambitious global commitment to achieving sustainable development. It is a universal commitment. The challenge, of course, is the statement of my parliamentary committee. The challenge is the potential. To succeed, we need to be able to move from unique global commitments to unique global implementation. If we don't succeed, that potential will not materialize. I want to touch on 3 unique challenges that I think are important in this context. First of all, universality, then the comprehensiveness, interlinkages, and finally, coherence. When we think about universality, we need, and I'm looking at this from the European point of view, we need to get rid of the old mindset of global north and global south. Already today, we have heard many references to development cooperation. This is not about development cooperation in Europe, this is about our own national policies. The 5 Ps of the Agenda 2030, people, prosperity, planet, peace, and partnerships, are relevant on the European continent as well. You only have to glance through the headlines of news during the past few years to understand how relevant this framework is. Migration, refugees, economic crisis, increasing inequalities, climate change influences, terrorism, violence, Brexit, new transatlantic relations. The 5 Ps are a very relevant framework for analyzing our own situation as well. So what is needed is implementation of the whole agenda everywhere, universally. And I'm not saying that it would not be important for the rich countries to ensure resourcing and financing, for the countries that have problems with production and consumption patterns to address these issues as well. But it's not only that responsibility that those countries have, it's a universal responsibility for the whole agenda. And I think that this is a basis for genuine new partnerships. Different countries have different challenges, and we need to look at them through these issues. On comprehensiveness, interlinkages, and coherence, we can only achieve sustainable development if we address the interlinkages instead of fragments and isolated elements. And the challenge is even bigger, because we can only succeed in making progress if we act in a coherent manner. In Europe, implementation of Agenda 2030 is typically about managing internal, national, and balancing it with external and global. It is clearly about managing trade-offs, being prepared to compromise for synergies. That is what is needed. This has an important implication on how these processes in our countries are organized and institutionalized. What is very clear is that we need strong national leadership. We need leadership that has the political power to coordinate. It will be very challenging in setups where the responsibility for Agenda 2030 is given to a single sector ministry, because there will be inadequate power to coordinate. In Finland, the solution has been for the Prime Minister's office to take the coordinating role, and that gives us new opportunities to address the coherence issues. In addition to public sector, we need fora, and in many cases these will be new fora for multiple actors with stakes in the future of sustainable development to come together. This is necessary for consensus on coherent way forward. In sustainable development, we can only win together. We can only win if we all play on the same side. There are already many promising examples of this happening, and I think that the voluntary reporting mechanisms are an important source for us to learn the lessons of innovations and new ways of doing things. I will then move to discussing what SDG evaluation is. What should evaluation be in this new operating environment? What are the things that need to be done in new ways? What are the issues that we cannot tackle in traditional approaches to evaluation? And again, there are unique opportunities. In Agenda 2030, in the review and follow-up, evaluation is included. And I think that after the frustration of the Millennium Declaration having overlooked evaluation, we have congratulated ourselves for the paragraphs 74G and 74H. Those are the two paragraphs where you will find the word evaluation. However, this great achievement only becomes meaningful if we succeed in using it as a stepping stone for action. It provides us an opportunity for acting now on evaluation, and not only as an afterthought, but we need action to make this potential materialize. Still on this acting now, Agenda 2030, as we have already heard, has kept our statistician, indicator, monitoring colleagues busy. There have been a lot of comings together and work done, both at national, regional, and global level. I'm wondering if there is a similar buzz in the evaluation community. It's a question of differentiating between the M, which is the monitoring, and the E. We still refer very often to M and E. And on the M side, things are happening. Is this true for the evaluation side as well? The unique challenges that we have for evaluation. First of all, it is clear that SDG evaluation is not business as usual. We need both new approaches and we need new capacities. On the new approaches, we need evaluation approaches that help us address complexity. A lot of work has been going on in this area already. The challenge now is to make these mainstream approaches to evaluation, to apply, to use the knowledge that we have. Similarly, we need evaluation approaches that do not fall into the trap of assuming linearity and logic where there is none. We need systems approaches, and we need to better understand different perspectives as a starting point to our evaluation. The new situation also requires new capacities. Many more colleagues need to understand the basic issues of evaluation. What is the additional value that evaluation can bring to decision making, the independent evaluation results can bring to decision making? I'm quoting from the excellent work that Eval Partners, Eval SDGs group, together with IIED, has done on analyzing the first voluntary reports on SDG implementation. And my quote is, "There appears to be very little awareness about just what evaluation is." We know, but for us to be successful, we need to make a much broader group of colleagues aware. Another type of capacity that is needed is to break out of the public policy silos. We need to work together with our public sector colleagues in different ministries, in different institutions, in a completely new way. And we need to learn to work in multi-stakeholder communities with private sector stake and stockholders, academia, civil society, issues that have been mentioned already many times. My assessment, my guess is that by far the most difficult capacity development challenge are the last two. Finding new ways of working together with others is a capacity challenge. Capacity challenges are not only technical. We evaluators are very comfortable speaking to other evaluators. This is not sufficient anymore. Fortunately, there have been many positive developments in this area during the last years, and I'm particularly referring to the cooperation with parliamentarians that very strongly now promote evaluation. It's been a successful partnership where we have been able to break the silos. Still on what SDG evaluation implies. The leaving no one behind has become the mantra of Agenda 2030. But what does this imply to evaluation? There are things that we have already done. We know the importance of disaggregating of data to make sure that the most easily marginalized are not hidden in figures. We have many approaches that build on participatory, empowering, human rights-based, feminist approaches in evaluation processes. But I would like to offer one more perspective, and that is that we need further thinking on whom we serve with evaluation results. Who are the clients of evaluation evidence? During the past year, there has been a strong discussion on evidence-based decision-making, and that is, of course, very important, making sure that evaluation serves decision makers. But with the leaving no one behind approach, it is time for me to re-emphasize going beyond the short-term focus on decision-making and think about evaluation as service to public interest. In our national evaluation systems, we should see evaluation as an important element of democratic and open governance. I think it is time to recognize citizens, clients, consumers of public and private services as users of evaluation evidence, a resource for them to hold decision makers accountable. Finally, on the future directions for evaluation. This NEC conference will provide us with ample opportunities to elaborate on this together. But you will know by now that the recipe for me is to make waves in still water, break bubbles, get out of silos, and work together. I think it's important to think beyond evaluation, and that is the only way to success. Thank you very much.
Importance of universality. It needs to be implemented everywhere and across the agenda. Importance of interlinkages and coherence. We see already now a little bit of cherry picking. Let's focus on this goal. Let's prioritize that goal when we are supporting countries on nationalization of SDGs. Of course, importance of national leadership above sectoral ministries and fora bringing different actors together. And I'm sure it's going to resonate with many of you, challenges and opportunities for evaluation. What do we do with complexity issue and system thinking? And how do we get others around the table, and how do we have multi-sectoral approach? And of course, your idea of not leaving no one behind, not in traditional sense, but really using evaluation as a as a evidence providing tool for the end users, whether these are consumers or citizens. I think a lot of food for thoughts. So with your permission, I would now open for questions, comments.
In our country, Senegal, I am the chief economist for the Prime Minister. Myself, I led the process because in the beginning the Minister of Finance was saying it's me, Minister of Environment, so it was not very clear. So we asked everybody to come together. After making sure that all are in the board, we have done the work, but then we have handled the work to the Minister of Finance and Planning. So now they are doing it very well. So just to say it could be also a multi-phase approach. The Prime Minister taking the lead and then giving to one minister.
Really excellent questions about how to bring others into evaluators discussion and how to bring evaluation into other streams. Maybe what we can do, we can just raise the hands of those who do not consider themselves as hardcore evaluators. So just to see how many colleagues in the room we have from other fields or streams of work. So raise your hand if you do not consider yourself hardcore evaluator.
Thank you very much for an excellent set of questions. I will just provide one more information from my own country on what has happened to ensure that we have adequate coordinating power for the Agenda 2030 and SDGs. Previously, sustainable development issues were coordinated by our Ministry of Environment because it was biased towards environmental sustainability issues. But now with Agenda 2030, the main responsibility has been shifted to the Prime Minister's office, as I said. And as you said, when the process has been coordinated and started, then of course there is need for all ministries to be involved. And during that stage, as you said, Ministry of Finance may well be a good coordinating body. But at least in the beginning, a strong political power for coordination is necessary and needed. An excellent reminder of the issue of financing for evaluations. I think that one basis for ensuring financing for evaluation is to ensure that we have evaluation policies. There's been a lot of discussion on whether we need national evaluation policies. In my country, we do not have them. We have a decentralized system where each and every ministry is responsible for the evaluations. We don't have a binding rule on how much funding should be reserved for evaluation. And it is perverse in a way, because the only sector in Finland where we have a benchmark, or at least where we compare the amount of money that is allocated to evaluation, is development cooperation. And that is because of the commitments that we have made in the OECD DAC on this issue. So it's a burning priority issue to ensure that financing is provided. Maybe I'll start with those, and Indran, if you continue, I may come back then.
Thank you very much, Riitta, for those interventions. Just to pick up on some of the themes, the issue of coordination came up, and we find that when we do the independent country program evaluations of UNDP, a big challenge is the lack of coordination, which makes it very difficult to evaluate coherently, and it links to when they talk about the one UN or the development as one, it falls quite quickly by the wayside because of the silo approach that continues because of the structure issue. And that is likely to be even more complex in a department or in a country and a government when different elements of the SDGs are allocated to different ministries. And the ministries don't talk to each other, but more so there isn't an adequate power that brings it all together. Now, some places seem to be making some progress in that, and in the course of this week, we are going to reflect on those reviews. Thank you for the point brought up in the other work, and you'll recognize that challenge. The second issue about partnerships, and I think we need to stop and reflect. The deeper question about partnership is how far are the partners going to go? Who's going to be brought in? On what basis? Who decides who the partner is? And when the partner comes in, does the partner really have power to engage with the powers that be? Because in some sense, it's almost a romantic, let's get 20 partners in. They come in, and as we know from an evaluation point of view, over time, the partners fall off because they're not taken seriously or they don't have the resources to sustain their continued engagement in the review of, for example, the SDGs. And that links to a broader and a deeper political question on whether there is an enabling political and environment that validates and even appreciates critical thought. Because in essence, one is talking about the performance of state. And one is looking at the performance of state, not from the view of the state, but also from the view of the citizens that the state claims to be supporting. The point on policy. In the UNEC norms and standards, the one we've adopted last year, we talk about a benchmark between 1% to 3%. Very few of the UN agencies and evaluation officers have it entrenched in policy, and even fewer, if they have it in, actually implemented. In the UNDP, we have a 1% of core and non-core in terms of budget. It is implemented, and 0.2 for the Independent Evaluation Office, which is quite significant. My point is, it's quite fine to spend 1% of other people's money to know how 99% is performing. So the argument that comes from the implementation people often, instead of putting money in evaluation, put it in programming. That means then you want to perform without any accountability. And that's totally irresponsible. So getting a percentage in, which we have, and we've set the example, it's there, it will yield much stronger benefits in the long term. But it's all about the overall performance issue. So I'll stop at that. The issue raised by the delegate from Algeria points to matters that need to be done in many countries in terms of building up the evaluation capacity, and that means, as you had mentioned correctly, setting up an institutional framework, ensuring that you got the training, the policy, etc., etc. We need to also recognize, and in terms of my own my personal experience, it takes a long time to build up a national evaluation system and capacity. It's an ongoing project. Having the political will, having the budget are important conditions. Having a coordination located well are also important, as is having a very strong and robust national evaluation network or association. And these can take decades to move, but it can all get negated quite quickly if you have political change that does not appreciate critical thinking and evaluative feedback. And I think as evaluators, we need to not just record, well, we now have a exponential growth in the number of countries that have evaluation associations, therefore there's greater transparency, accountability, therefore there's greater capacity. It's wrong. Truth be told, many of the associations are one or two persons, operations which are so-called country representatives but are not really deeply entrenched associations. And that study needs to be done. And that also needs to reflect on why that has happened. The point we go on, we need to have a sense of critique. The euphoria of setting up an association doesn't mean that you already have all the parts, the rest of the components that actually move through. So good point, and we wish you well. I did do an evaluation in Algeria, and we recognize the issues there, but it is progressing. The SDGs and the voluntary reviews, it's not mandatory for the member states to subject themselves to reporting on the SDGs. They do so on a voluntary basis, but it has been going well because from 20 to 40, and the quality has been going up. So in a way, it is a sort of a peer review pressure which obliges the countries to indicate in an open, transparent learning mode what they have done and where the challenges are. And it appears to be working quite well. One of the sessions in the week will actually be looking at those reports. We could be very critical of the reports, but always look at from where we started. You're starting from a point where there's been no reporting on the development intervention in a country, and now you're moving to a point where there is a much better and more critical discussion. Each of those reports indicate issues that the colleague from Algeria brought up on institutional location of SDGs and what that means. And the reports also indicate the myth of M and E. What is really happening is M. There's very little E. In some cases, there's some review. Evaluation is after the event. It's independent. It makes a judgment about past performance. For some reason or the other, it gets mixed with learning, and it all seems to be in the same pot. Let's draw a clear distinction between independent evaluation, which is for accountability purposes, and other forms of evaluative activity, which is for learning purposes. And that's a conversation that needs to happen. And Ada, your point in terms of the other partners, quite often say, what can be done? A lot is happening, even in the bilateral discussions with donors, and the whole notion of North-South doesn't exist. There are new development players that are coming through. A lot is not recorded. And the point is, how do we get that information out and make sense of it? It'll be very arrogant of us to believe that an evaluative community, we're going to offer our services out there and begin to change the world. We need to work in ways that the conversation is also for us to provide a value that is so compelling that people understand that evaluation makes them look good at multiple levels for their own performance.
Thank you very much. One additional comment to the evaluation capacity development issue, and it's an issue that I think that in our discussions has been overlooked. That is the importance of basic university level evaluation, education and training. We have all kinds of remedies for where there is no basic education. We organize courses, we organize credentialing systems, we organize this and that. Let's put the issue of basic evaluation education on the agenda again. Let's map what are the curricula, what are the teacher capacities, training materials that we have available. Yet let's use virtual means to ensure that in countries, including my own, where there is no basic university level evaluation education, we can provide access to that. So focus on the foundation for capacity, that is basic education. On the reporting and what has happened in Finland, I just want to mention that a colleague of mine from the Prime Minister's office will be presenting the Finnish experience in one of the sessions tomorrow. Basically, we have established a system where we have an annual cycle and then we have a 4-year cycle for national reporting, because our government period is 4 years. This includes reporting cycles, but importantly also fora for discussing the reports with national stakeholders, mechanisms whereby parliaments are brought into the discussion. So it's more than reporting on the indicators. It's a process whereby we want to involve others. And this is also referring to a previous question on how can we preach to the non-converted. These are the mechanisms that we have established in Finland, but more on that by my colleague in a session tomorrow. On the donor-driven project evaluations, I must start by saying that a deep sigh, and I disagree with Indran. I don't think that enough has been done. We'll have a good opportunity to discuss this, the role of OECD DAC donors in evaluation capacity development and in the evaluation system, again tomorrow when we have a session on these things. I think we have taken steps back from the Paris Declaration. I feel that it's very difficult to move into using national systems in evaluation if national systems are not used in programming and implementation. It's difficult to harmonize and align at the end part of the cycle if you don't do it. And the trend is not the most positive one during these days. So huge challenges. We also have the OECD DAC EvalNet chair participating in the conference. So one more good opportunity to challenge us, DAC donors. Very quick reply to the partnerships for evaluation capacity development. Because I am the president of a voluntary organization for professional evaluation, the VOPEs, I want to emphasize the important role of the national societies, regional societies, and global evaluation societies and association in bringing people together and offering capacity development support. But these frameworks only offer what we bring to them. If we are ready to share from our experiences, you told that in your country there are 2 new university programs starting. Extremely interesting to hear what will come out of those. And I'm sure Indran will react on the UN role. So.
Thank you, Riitta. Indran.
I think noting the time, just the one point. I think it'll be a good point to debate whether evaluation's been captured by accountability, learning, and global knowledge. I think evaluation has moved to learning and global knowledge because it's easier to do, but still doesn't produce the accountability that's necessary, and accountability does remain pretty fundamental as long as evaluation remains having the element of a judgment to show people that what has been set out is going to be done. But we'll continue the debate, Sukai. Thank you.
So thank you very much.